The shrill ring of my phone sliced through the quiet of my kitchen, rattling the mug of coffee I hadn't finished. I fumbled for it with trembling hands, nearly dropping the receiver. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice shaky, though I didn't yet know why. The voice on the other end wasn't one I expected. It was frantic, tight, urgent. Isla. No, not her, someone else. My heart lurched as the words hit me, though I had barely processed them. "Mom, it's Isla. She's in the hospital. She needs a kidney." Now, my knees felt weak. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't stop the cold, crawling fear that wrapped itself around my chest. What do you mean she needs a kidney?" I stammered, my words hollow, even to my own ears. The voice hurried on, not giving me time to breathe. "They said you're the only match." "The doctors, please, Mom." "Please, she doesn't have much time." Time. That word hit harder than anything else. Seconds, minutes, a heartbeat. Isla, my daughter, the one I had carried for 9 months, raised, protected, and loved through every scraped knee and broken heart, was in danger. And now they wanted me to save her with a part of myself. My own kidney. My own body. The images came unbidden, her birth, the first time I held her tiny body against mine. Her laughter echoing down the hallway of our small house, the nights I stayed awake with her soothing, fevered brows and quieting nightmares. All of it, and now it felt so fragile, so perilously fragile. I ran my fingers through my hair, gripping the phone as if it were a lifeline. The operator's voice was steady, but urgent. "We're preparing for the transplant. Time is critical. You must come immediately. You are her only compatible donor. Please get here safely." I dropped the phone onto the counter and stumbled toward the door, fumbling for my coat. My body felt foreign, weighted, frozen, and yet moving with instinctive purpose. My mind raced thoughts, spinning faster than I could follow. Could I do it? Could I give a piece of myself to keep her alive? I had never considered the possibility, never imagined the choice would land in my lap like this. But now, there was no choice. Not really. I paused a moment at the door, letting my gaze sweep over the familiar warmth of my kitchen. Memories, countless, vivid, bittersweet, flooded through me, the late nights at the market, selling produce to pay bills. The tiny hands of Isla and Caleb tugging at my apron. The tears I hid when I was exhausted, but couldn't let them see. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ache in my heart seemed to lead to this moment. This moment where my love was tested not by circumstance, but by the stark reality that life and death rested in my hands. I exhaled, feeling the weight settle on my shoulders. Fear, yes, but also a sharp, unwavering clarity. I was her mother. I had been there through everything, and now I would be there again in the most intimate, terrifying way possible. I slid my keys into my pocket, my legs moving on their own, as I headed to the car, gripping the steering wheel with a fierce determination. Every passing mile felt like both a heartbeat and an eternity, the sirens wailing in my mind as I imagined Isla lying in a hospital bed, waiting, trusting, fragile. I promised myself silently, over and over, I would do whatever it took to keep her alive. And as the hospital lights loomed ahead, cold and sterile, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, preparing for the decision that would demand everything of me. The hospital lobby felt impossibly cold, though the fluorescent lights did little to illuminate the heaviness pressing down on me. I clutched my purse like a lifeline, my stomach twisting with dread. The nurse at the desk barely glanced up, directing me to the transplant wing with brisk efficiency. Every step echoed in my chest, a drumbeat of anticipation and fear. I arrived at Isla's room, where the beeping monitors and the faint antiseptic scent made the air feel taut, almost electric. Her husband, Leonard, was pacing, wringing his hands so tightly that his knuckles were pale. "Fiona," he said. voice quivering. They said, "You're the only one. You have to do this. She won't make it without you." I swallowed hard, nodding slowly, trying to keep my throat from tightening. I understand. I whispered, though. The words felt like a fragile shield against the panic rising inside me. Then Morgan appeared, stepping lightly as if she had rehearsed this moment 100 times. She stopped beside me, placing a hand delicately on my shoulder. Her eyes were soft, almost coaxing, but there was a glint there I recognized from years of tension control wrapped in charm. "Fiona," she said, her voice calm, measured. "You know this is your duty. You brought Isla into this world. You raised her. No one else can do what must be done. It's not just a choice, it's what a mother does." I flinched at the weight in her words. Duty, obligation, guilt, all pressed against me tighter than the straps they would later use in the OR. My heart hammered against my ribs, the fight between instinct and fear roaring louder than any beeping monitor. I tried to reason with myself. I had raised these children, had stayed awake through fevers, and tears had carried every burden alongside them. I had given everything. And now the ultimate sacrifice was being asked of me. My hands shook as I touched Isla's pale fingers, delicate as porcelain. She gave me a weak smile, a faint squeeze of recognition, unaware of the storm building around us. The doctors entered then, brisk, professional eyes flicking between Isla and me. They explained timelines, risks, procedures, the urgency of every second. Each word was precise, necessary, but it drove home the impossible magnitude of the decision resting on my shoulders. I breathed in, forcing calm, forcing resolve. This was more than fear. It was responsibility. It was love. It was the kind of choice no one should have to make, yet here I was standing at the threshold. And as Morgan's gaze lingered, both comforting and demanding, I felt the world narrow to one sharp, unbearable line: save my daughter, or face the consequences of hesitation. With a trembling hand, I nodded to the doctors, letting the path toward the OR take hold, my mind already racing ahead to the moments that would define everything. The cold of the operating room hit me the moment the sliding doors parted sharper than the winter air outside. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor, echoing like an alarm in the cavernous space. I followed the nurse to the center of the room, feeling every eye on me, though the staff tried to remain professional. The bright, sterile lights cast harsh white across the gleaming instruments, making each tray and scalpel glint, as if warning me of the impossible choice ahead. A monitor beeped steadily beside the operating table, each sound a sharp reminder that time was moving forward, that Isla's life hung in the balance. I lay down slowly, feeling the hardness of the table press against my spine, grounding me even as panic twisted in my stomach. My arms were strapped gently but firmly, my legs secured, and suddenly I felt like a marionette in someone else's play. My body powerless to the unfolding scene around me. The anesthesiologist's voice was calm, reassuring, though every syllable sent a tremor of reality down my spine. "We'll take care of you, Ms. Callahan. You're in good hands. Everything will be fine." I nodded, though my lips felt numb, like the words themselves could not cross the chasm of fear that had opened in my chest. I watched the surgical staff move with precision, arranging instruments, adjusting lights, testing equipment, and I noticed small things that shouldn't have been noticeable. Furtive glances between two nurses, a whisper behind a mask, the slight pause in the technician's hand as he aligned the scalpel. My stomach churned. My body was tense, every muscle coiled as if anticipating a strike. The fear was not just for myself, it was for Isla, and I felt it in my bones. Every heartbeat of mine seemed to echo in tandem with hers, and every irregularity around me became a threat. I tried to focus on my breathing, slow and controlled, imagining each inhale drawing courage and each exhale pushing fear away. But the room pressed in the cold lights, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the scent of antiseptic. It all combined into a weight that made me feel like I was suspended over a void, dangling between life and a potential disaster. I remembered Isla as a baby, the fragile sound of her cries, the tiny warmth of her hand curled around mine. I had spent 32 years protecting her, teaching her, loving her, in a way that left me raw open. And now she needed me in the most intimate, terrifying way possible. I had to give a part of myself so she could live. It was an impossible burden, and I felt it in every pulse, every anxious thought. Dr. Whitaker approached, then tall, confident, his voice steady, as he reviewed my chart one last time. "We're ready when you are," he said. I nodded, swallowing hard. My eyes flicked to Morgan, who was observing from behind the glass partition. Serene, too serene. Her gaze was fixed not on the instruments, not on Isla, but on me. Something in the calmness felt predatory, as if she were measuring how far she could push without resistance. The nurse positioned the IV, her hands gentle but quick. "You're doing the right thing," she said, though. I couldn't tell if her reassurance was genuine or a reflex of protocol. I caught a shadow of exchange between two other staff members. A nod, a whispered word, a glance that went unremarked by the others. My chest tightened. I felt suddenly very small, very exposed, aware that I was the pivot on which this entire scene turned, not just for Isla, but for the hidden dynamics swirling around me. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to ground myself in something solid. I focused on the idea that I was strong enough, that I had survived every hardship and sacrifice to this moment. Every step of my life had led here, every scraped knee I had kissed, every sleepless night, every wound I had mended for my children. I reminded myself that love had brought me here, that maternal instinct was both a weapon and a shield. Then the anesthesiologist's mask hovered near my face, and I felt the cool rush of oxygen. My chest tightened with a final wave of fear, anticipation, and responsibility. The room swirled slightly, lights, blurring instruments, gleaming beeps accelerating in my ears. I clung to one thought: Isla was depending on me. Every ounce of me, every heartbeat, every choice had to be enough. I opened my eyes briefly, catching a last glance of Morgan behind the glass of Dr. Whitaker of the surgical team. There was a tension in the air that went beyond the procedure, a subtle undercurrent I couldn't yet place. Something was off, but I had no time to dwell on it. I was on the threshold of a decision that would demand everything. And as I exhaled, bracing for what was next, I felt a sudden, inexplicable ripple of dread, the kind that whispered that the moments to come would change everything. The nurse adjusted my position. The monitor beeped steadily, and I knew the time had come to face not only the surgery, but the truths hidden just beyond the sterile walls. As I lay there, strapped to the table, the cold light above me seemed to pull my thoughts inward. My mind drifted away from the sterile walls of the operating room and back to the long, winding years of raising Isla and Caleb. I remembered the first time I held Isla, her tiny body trembling in my hands, her cries piercing through the silence of that quiet apartment. I had rocked her for hours, shushing my own exhaustion, memorizing the curve of her little fingers, the soft sighs that told me she trusted me completely. Those years were not easy. Every morning, I rose before dawn to prepare breakfast and pack lunches, then walked Caleb to the school bus, carrying the weight of groceries and unpaid bills like invisible chains on my shoulders. The evenings were no less demanding. Homework baths, bandages for scraped knees, and stories whispered in the dark, all while my body protested the fatigue. I sewed torn clothes for neighbors just to make a few extra dollars, never complaining, never letting the children see the strain. I wanted them to grow up believing the world was vast but safe, even when it felt like it was closing in around me. I remembered nights when Isla woke with fevers too high to count, when Caleb's coughs echoed down empty hallways, and I sat beside their beds, my own heart racing faster than theirs, praying for strength, for patience, for enough energy to carry on. I sacrificed my comfort, my sleep, my very body to protect them. Every scraped knee, every tear, every quiet word of reassurance, I whispered, those were my currency in the debt of love I owed them. And now, the weight of all those years pressed against me again. It was not fear for myself that clenched my chest so tightly. It was fear for Isla, for the daughter I had nurtured through storms, for the child who had grown into the woman lying fragile and dependent in the hospital bed. All those years of vigilance, of tending to every hurt and worry, had led to this singular, terrifying moment. My life became the lifeline she needed. Even as the memories flowed, a shadow lingered at the edges. Morgan's calm, almost rehearsed manner had unsettled me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Her compliments, her subtle nudges toward responsibility, seemed too smooth, too intentional. There had been moments over the past weeks, small and easy to dismiss, when I had noticed her lingering too long over charts, when she smiled in ways that didn't reach her eyes, when her questions about Isla's medications felt pointed, calculated. At the time, I had pushed those thoughts aside. Love makes us protective, makes us trust blindly. But now, with the hum of monitors and the gleam of instruments around me, those small doubts returned with a sting. Could love for my children truly blind me to danger lurking nearby? Could I have missed something critical in the shadows? Something that would put Isla in harm's way? Despite all my vigilance, my pulse quickened, not just from fear, but from the knowledge that my instincts honed over decades of care. Whispered warnings I had yet to understand fully. I exhaled slowly, grounding myself in the truth I had always lived by. Protect them at any cost. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of my body and spirit had been for this purpose. And yet a faint tremor of unease threaded through my resolve. There was more at stake than I realized, and the moment I had been preparing for all my life was not just about survival. It was about trust, vigilance, and the possibility that the enemy might be closer than I ever imagined. With that thought coiling in my mind, I braced myself for what came next, knowing the road ahead demanded more than fear or devotion. It demanded clarity, courage, and the sharp attention of a mother who could no longer afford to look away. Morgan's voice was the first thing I heard when I stepped into the hospital family room. Calm, deliberate, almost too controlled. "Fiona," she said, placing a hand lightly on my arm. "You brought her into this world. You raised her. No one else can do what must be done. You know it's your duty." I stiffened. The word duty had never felt so heavy, so sharp against my chest. My pulse thrummed like a drum, and the familiar warmth of maternal instinct tangled with fear, doubt, and an odd sense of entrapment. Harlan, standing behind her, nodded solemnly, his gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. "Everything depends on you," he added, his voice low, resonant. "You're the only one who can give her a chance." I wanted to speak, to protest, to say that it wasn't just duty. It was terrifying that my body, my life was being asked to pay the ultimate price. But the words caught in my throat, choked by the weight of expectation. Every glance, every subtle inflection from Morgan and Harlan pressed on me like invisible chains, and I realized with a pang that I was standing in a room where love, fear, and manipulation collided. I sat down, fingers twisting in my lap, trying to steady myself. I don't know if I can." My voice faltered, the fear raw and brittle. Morgan's smile was soft, practiced, almost comforting. Fiona, listen to me, she said, leaning closer, her voice gentle but insistent. No one else can do this. Isla needs you. You've always been the one to step up to protect a sacrifice. This is no different. We all depend on you to do what only you can do. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. It was true. For years, I had carried the weight of their lives on my shoulders, tending to scraped knees, fevers, late nights, and heartbreaks. I had made countless small sacrifices, each one invisible, each one unquestioned. But this, the gift of a kidney, was a cost I had never imagined paying, and yet they framed it as my obligation, my unbreakable duty. Harlan stepped closer, his tone firm, almost commanding. You don't have a choice, Fiona. Not really. Family depends on you. Blood and love demand it. You wouldn't let your child suffer if the roles were reversed, would you? The words struck me like a hammer. They weren't merely asking, they were assuming, insisting, molding my fear into compliance. My mind raced memories of long nights and endless responsibilities flashing before me. Every decision I'd ever made to protect my family now seemed to lead to this moment, to this impossible test of love, fear, and endurance. I could feel the pull in two directions, the instinctive, fierce need to save Isla, and the creeping awareness that something was off, that the gentle insistence from Morgan hid more than care. A shadow of suspicion tinged my thoughts, but it was drowned beneath the relentless tide of expectation. I exhaled slowly, letting the words sink into me, the tension coiling tighter in my chest. I was trapped, caught between love and obligation, fear and the relentless insistence of those around me. The weight of their gaze, their quiet manipulations pressed down like stones, and I realized with a pang that my own resolve would need to carry me through what was coming, no matter how impossible it felt. And as I finally nodded, acknowledging the unspoken pressure and the road ahead, I felt the first stirrings of doubt mingled with determination, knowing that each step closer to the operating room carried not just my daughter's life, but secrets waiting just beyond the sterile walls. Jasper had been unusually quiet that afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the hospital room floor while I organized Isla's things. His small hands fidgeted with a toy car, but his eyes darted constantly to Morgan, following her movements like a hawk. I noticed the way he furrowed his brows whenever she approached Isla's bedside, the slight tilt of his head, as if measuring her every word. Jasper, honey, are you okay? I asked softly, crouching beside him. He looked up at me, eyes wide and serious for a boy so young. I think Mom isn't telling the whole truth, he said quietly, almost a whisper, his grip on the toy tightening. She's acting weird. She smiles, but it's not real. And the way she moves around, like she's hiding something. My heart skipped a beat. I had noticed small things too, her furtive glances, the way she adjusted Isla's medications with unusual care, the subtle pauses when Dr. Whitaker looked her way, but hearing it voiced by Jasper made the unease tangible. I bent closer, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. What makes you say that, sweetheart? He glanced back at Morgan, who was pretending to check charts, then back at me. I saw her last night, talking on the phone. She said things like, "Make sure no one sees this." And she hid something in a little bag. I don't know what it is, but it didn't look like medicine I've seen before. I swallowed, trying to maintain calm, though the words lodged heavy in my chest. His innocence and clarity cut through the fog of fear I had been carrying. Somehow, Jasper could see what I, an adult, had tried to rationalize or ignore. Jasper, I whispered, keeping my voice low so Morgan wouldn't hear. Thank you for telling me. I need you to stay observant. Don't let anyone see you worrying too much, okay? We have to be careful. He nodded, eyes serious, but there was a spark there, a courage I hadn't realized he possessed. Even at 9 years old, he seemed aware that the balance of what happened next could shift on the edge of secrets and truth. I ruffled his hair gently and whispered, "You might be the one who helps us figure out what's really going on." He smiled faintly, but his gaze stayed fixed on Morgan, silent and watchful, already. Calculating, already aware. And as Isla stirred slightly in her bed, I felt a sliver of hope threading through the fear that perhaps this small, vigilant mind could see the shadows. Adults overlooked a quiet hero, ready to act when the time came. I had been checking Isla's room for the 100th time that afternoon, making sure she had everything she might need for the transplant, when my eyes caught something unusual. A small, unmarked vial was tucked behind the neatly stacked bottles of her prescribed medication. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, the label blank, except for a faint scrawled number that didn't match anything in her chart. I stared at it for a long moment, the sterile light catching on the glass. How had I missed this before? Every instinct I had honed over 32 years screamed at me that something was wrong. I knew Morgan had been attentive, meticulous even, but now the meticulousness felt calculated, precise, in a way that set off alarms in my chest. Jasper appeared at the doorway, small and serious, his eyes immediately drawn to the vial in my hand. "Grandma?" he said softly, his voice low, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I told you, there's something about Mom. She's hiding things. That's what I meant last night." I knelt to his level, holding the vial carefully. "I see it now, Jasper. You were right." My heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the sudden weight of realization. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The strange phone calls, the furtive glances, the little hesitations when Morgan handled Isla's medications. He stepped closer, his small hand brushing mine. What if she's doing something to hurt Isla? Not on purpose. Maybe, but you have to check. His words were measured, but the fear behind them was clear. At 9 years old, he understood that the stakes were high, higher than any child should ever have to comprehend. I exhaled slowly, trying to push the panic down, trying to steady my hands enough to examine the vial. I couldn't make assumptions yet, but the weight of suspicion pressed against me like a physical force. Morgan had always presented herself as helpful, calm, and caring. Could it really be possible that the same person who smiled gently at Isla could hide something dangerous in plain sight? I carefully set the vial on the desk, glancing at Jasper. "We'll have to be careful, but we need to know exactly what this is." "But you've done well noticing things, sweetheart. Stay alert, okay? Don't mention it to anyone yet." He nodded, eyes serious, already scanning the room as if memorizing every detail. I realized that his young mind was sharper than I had credited, capable of observing what adults overlooked in their busy rationalizations. The rest of the room felt suddenly charged, every detail loaded with potential significance. Even the smallest clue, a bottle slightly out of place, a misfiled chart, a hurried glance, could hold the key to understanding the hidden danger surrounding Isla. I tucked the vial into my hand, careful not to disturb it, and whispered to Jasper, "We have to follow the evidence. Whatever it takes, we need to protect her." As we turned toward the door, my mind raced, connecting these new clues with everything else I had noticed in the past days, knowing that the next discovery could change everything. I hadn't left Isla's side for more than a few minutes, just enough to stretch my legs in the small hospital corridor, when I noticed Morgan standing near the nurse's station, her phone pressed to her ear. Her posture was rigid, tense, the kind of tension that betrays secrets even before words are spoken. I slowed my steps, pretending to check my watch, but my eyes stayed fixed on her. She whispered low and urgent, then glanced around as if making sure no one could hear. The words were muffled, unintelligible, but her tone carried an unmistakable edge, impatience, warning, and something darker I couldn't yet name. I bit my lip, trying to steady my breathing. Could it really be possible that the same woman who had smiled and nodded so calmly at Isla's bedside was hiding something dangerous? My instincts screamed, but fear rooted me to the spot. I had to protect Isla. Yet every step toward uncovering the truth felt like stepping into a storm I couldn't control. Then Caleb appeared, his brow furrowed as he adjusted the strap of his messenger bag. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice so Morgan wouldn't hear. "Did you notice what she just did? I was checking Isla's chart, and some of the notes don't match the prescribed schedule. Plus, she slipped out of the room for 10 minutes, right when the nurse was distracted." I felt a shiver run down my spine. Caleb had always been observant, detail-oriented, but hearing him corroborate my own suspicions made the unease tangible. "I saw her too," I whispered back, glancing toward Morgan again. "Her phone call. Something isn't right. But if we push too hard, she'll notice, and Isla could be in immediate danger." Caleb nodded, his jaw tight. "We need to gather evidence quietly. Nothing obvious. Just enough to understand what's going on." I swallowed hard, my hands shaking slightly. The responsibility of safeguarding Isla now felt heavier than ever. Every instinct, every memory of nights spent tending to fevers and soothing fears surged through me. I wanted to rush in, confront Morgan, demand the truth, but the thought of jeopardizing Isla's safety froze my actions. I had to balance caution with urgency, protection with vigilance. Morgan moved again, slipping past the nurse's station with a quick, fluid motion that spoke of practiced deceit. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the patient rooms, then darted to the elevator, as if she had an urgent destination. My stomach tightened. Something about the way she carried herself suggested that whatever she was hiding, it wasn't small. I tightened my grip on the unmarked vial I had found earlier hidden in my purse. Every thought circled back to it, to Jasper's observations, to Caleb's corroboration. I realized the danger wasn't just hypothetical anymore. It was deliberate, precise, and closer than I had dared imagine. Yet beneath the fear, I felt a spark of resolve. I had faced hardship, betrayal, and impossible choices before. I had protected my children through storms, through nights without rest, through the quiet despair of watching them struggle. This moment was different, but I knew my instincts would guide me. My body ached with anxiety, but my mind sharpened with clarity. I could not let Isla be harmed, even if the cost was facing truths I was unprepared to confront. I exhaled, steadying myself as I moved back toward Isla's room, Caleb trailing silently behind. Each step was weighted, each glance cautious, each thought a reminder that the danger was real and the next discovery could shift everything. And as I entered the room, sliding the door shut behind me, I braced myself for the next moment, knowing that the threads of deception were tighter than I had realized, and that every heartbeat now carried the tension of truths waiting to be uncovered. I had just returned from the hospital, my mind still spinning from Morgan's hurried calls and Caleb's pointed observations. Isla's surgery was hours away, and the tension in my chest hadn't eased a fraction. The house felt too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards amplified every shadow, a warning. I found Morgan in the kitchen, sipping tea with an unnatural calm that made my skin crawl. "Morgan," I said, my voice steady, though my stomach nodded. "We need to talk about Isla's medications. I noticed something odd at the hospital." She tilted her head, lips curling into a practiced smile. "Fiona, dear, everything is perfectly fine. You worry too much. Isla is being cared for just as she should be." I felt a flash of irritation and something colder, a warning I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. Her words were smooth, but her eyes flicked toward the counter, toward a small, unmarked bottle tucked behind the sugar canister. My pulse quickened. "I saw you at the nurse's station," I pressed, leaning closer. "You were on the phone. You weren't supposed to leave her side for that long. What exactly are you doing?" Her smile didn't waver, but her hand tightened around the teacup knuckles. White. Fiona, you're imagining things. Really, you should focus on your daughter's upcoming surgery. Worrying yourself sick won't help anyone. Before I could respond, Jasper appeared at my side, clutching a small, cracked cell phone. Grandma, I have something to show you, he said, his voice urgent. He held out the device, but I shook my head gently. Not now, Jasper, I whispered. Right now, we need to focus on Isla. I can't risk being distracted, not with the surgery hours away. His shoulders slumped slightly, but he didn't protest further. I knew he understood children, often sensed the urgency adults couldn't articulate. And yet, I couldn't ignore the tight knot of suspicion twisting in my chest. Morgan's calm demeanor, her evasive words, the small inconsistencies, everything screamed that something was off. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that my priority was Isla. The surgery had to come first. Whatever Morgan was hiding, I would deal with it later. But the unease clung stubbornly, a shadow at the edge of my awareness, threading through every word and gesture in the room. Morgan continued to sip her tea, her posture relaxed, but I noticed the faint trembling of her fingers as she set the cup down. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. My instincts prickled. There was more here than met the eye, and I had to trust them, even while pushing the fear aside. I turned to leave, guiding Jasper gently toward his room. Stay close, sweetheart, I murmured. We'll deal with this later. As the front door closed behind me, I knew that every careful step, every observation, and every small piece of evidence was leading me toward a truth I wasn't fully prepared to face, and that the next discoveries could change everything in ways I could not yet predict. The hospital doors slid open with that sterile whoosh, and I stepped back into the chill of the operating wing. My heart was still hammering from the confrontation at home, and every step toward the OR felt like wading through a storm. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors, casting a harsh glare that made my skin prickle. Nurses and techs moved with efficiency, but every glance toward me seemed to carry the weight of expectation. The unspoken question, "Are you ready?" I tried to focus on Isla. Her life depended on me. Every beat of her heart echoed in my chest. Every shallow breath reminded me that there was no turning back. I clutched the unmarked vial I had found at home, hidden in my purse, and forced myself to breathe slowly to calm the whirlwind of thoughts spinning in my mind. Dr. Whitaker appeared tall and confident, clipboard in hand. His gaze swept over me, noting the tension in my shoulders, the hesitation in my steps. "Ms. Callahan," he said gently, "we're ready when you are." His voice was steady, professional, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes, as if he knew that fear and doubt were gnawing at me even before the anesthesiologist did. I swallowed hard, nodding. I could feel every heartbeat, every pulse racing through my body like a drum of warning. It wasn't just the surgery I feared, it was what I suspected, the shadow lingering behind Morgan's smiles, the faint tremor in her hands, the secrecy that had been quietly building over days. Every instinct told me there was danger I hadn't yet fully uncovered, and yet every second counted for Isla. The nurse guided me to the table, her hands firm but gentle. "Just lie down, Ms. Callahan. You're doing the right thing," she said, adjusting the straps over my arms. I nodded mutely, trying to absorb the reassurance even as my thoughts churned. I felt trapped between the urgent need to save my daughter and the gnawing suspicion that someone in the room had ulterior motives. Morgan appeared behind the glass, serene and calm, her gaze fixed on me. Every step I took toward the table felt heavier, as if her presence alone was a weight pressing down on my chest. I reminded myself that my focus had to remain on Isla, on her life, not on the secrets yet to be revealed. Yet I couldn't push the unease aside entirely. It clung to me like a shadow, whispering that the truth I had begun to suspect was closer than I wanted to admit. Caleb appeared at my side, silent but watchful. He noticed my trembling fingers, the slight hesitation in my gait, and gave me a subtle nod. He didn't need words. He understood the storm raging inside me. Together, we moved forward, navigating the precise choreography of the OR staff, each step a delicate balance between obedience and vigilance. The anesthesiologist approached, mask in hand, the cool breath of oxygen brushing my cheeks. My chest tightened as I realized how close we were, how fragile the boundary between life and loss had become. I could feel every pulse, every thrum of my own heart, interwoven with Isla's fragile existence. The fear and the duty intertwined so completely that it was hard to distinguish one from the other. I closed my eyes briefly, recalling Jasper's wide, serious gaze, Caleb's quiet observations, the unmarked vial I had carried like a secret talisman. My mind raced with possibilities, weighing risk against necessity. How could I protect Isla if I didn't yet know the full scope of danger? Every instinct screamed that Morgan's calm was false, that her carefully measured presence was hiding something critical. Yet the moments ticked away relentlessly, and Isla's life hung on the fragile thread of my choice. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my trembling hands. The monitors beeped in sync with my pulse. The surgical team moved around me with precise efficiency, and Morgan's eyes never left me. I forced my focus back to the truth I could control: my love, my commitment, my willingness to sacrifice for Isla. Whatever lay hidden behind the smiles and whispered words would have to wait, because right now there was only one urgent, undeniable reality: I had to act to save her. And as the nurse positioned the IV and Dr. Whitaker gave the final nod, I braced myself for the next step, knowing that the road ahead would demand courage, clarity, and the sharp attention of a mother determined to protect her child, no matter the cost. The OR lights flickered overhead as I sat at the hospital's small waiting desk, poring over Isla's charts for the 100th time. Every line of her records was familiar, yet something nagged at me, tiny inconsistencies I had overlooked in my initial review. A dosage here, a timestamp there, a note about her vitals that didn't align with the schedule I knew to be accurate. My fingers traced the lines, circling the anomalies with trembling hands, my pulse quickening with each discovery. It wasn't that the errors were massive. They were subtle, easy to dismiss, but my instincts screamed that no detail, however small, could be ignored. Morgan had always been meticulous, but this felt different. Calculated, deliberate, a pattern forming beneath the guise of routine care. My heart pounded as I realized that the stakes had shifted. This was no longer just about trusting the medical team. This was about ensuring Isla's safety in the face of someone I had once called family. I felt the familiar presence of Jasper at my side. He held the cracked cell phone I had seen him with earlier, and in his small hands were photos and recordings he had managed to capture discreetly. "Grandma," he whispered, eyes wide and serious. "Listen to this." He played a recording of Morgan's voice, calm but insistent, giving instructions that didn't match Isla's prescribed regimen. The words were subtle, almost casual, but the meaning was unmistakable. Someone was altering what Isla was supposed to receive. I pressed my lips together, my mind spinning. The fear I had carried for hours intensified, but it was tempered by a cold clarity. My daughter's life wasn't just in my hands, it was being influenced by deception. And if I didn't act carefully, the consequences could be catastrophic. I glanced at Jasper, who met my gaze with unspoken determination. At 9 years old, he was more aware than anyone else in that room, more observant than the doctors who trusted routine, more vigilant than the adults who refused to see what was hidden in plain sight. I carefully gathered the charts, the recordings, and the photographs, weighing the evidence in my mind. Every irregularity, every misaligned note, every hidden camera angle pointed to the same truth: Isla's safety could not be guaranteed without uncovering what Morgan was hiding. And yet, there was no time. The surgery was imminent, the OR doors mere minutes away, and my focus had to remain on my daughter's immediate survival. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my shaking hands. I couldn't confront Morgan here, not yet. Every step had to be measured, every move precise. But the evidence was enough to confirm my suspicions. Something sinister was at play, and I had to keep one eye on Isla and one eye on the shadows surrounding her. Jasper nudged me gently. "Grandma, we have to show someone trustworthy. Before it's too late," he said, voice taut with urgency. I nodded, knowing he was right, yet aware that time was slipping through our fingers. I tucked the files safely into my bag, careful not to disturb the monitors or alert the staff, and motioned for him to follow quietly. As we approached the OR, the sterile air seemed heavier, each step amplified in my ears. The monitors outside Isla's room beeped steadily, a rhythm that synchronized with my thudding heartbeat. Morgan stood behind the glass, serene and composed, but I could see the faint tension in her shoulders, the subtle flicker of unease in her eyes when she caught sight of us. I gripped Jasper's hand tightly, reminding myself that every moment mattered, every decision counted, and that the truth, however hidden, could not remain in the shadows. The doors loomed ahead, and the next step would carry us into the most critical point of the operation and the most dangerous confrontation yet. The bright lights of the operating room washed over me as I lay strapped to the table, my pulse hammering like a drum in my chest. Every breath I took seemed shallow, every beat of my heart a reminder that Isla's life depended entirely on me. I could feel the rigid precision of the surgical staff around me, the metallic scent of sterilized instruments pressing into my senses, the rhythmic beep of the monitors dictating the seconds slipping by. The weight of fear and duty pressed heavily on my chest, leaving no room for anything else except a faint, nagging unease about Morgan. Morgan stood just beyond the glass partition, calm, serene, the picture of composure. Her eyes followed every movement, and I could sense the subtle authority in the way she observed. Yet beneath that practiced calm, I knew there was a tension I couldn't fully interpret, a shadow hidden behind her smiles and reassuring nods. My instincts, sharpened over decades of motherhood, told me something was wrong, though I had no proof. Not until Jasper. I had instructed him to stay quiet, to observe and gather evidence, but now he was running toward the OR with urgency that made my stomach tighten. The swinging doors slammed open, startling the entire team. Jasper, small but resolute, burst in, clutching a worn, cracked cell phone and a few folded photographs, his 9-year-old face set with determination, far beyond his years. "Grandma," he shouted, voice clear and strong, cutting through the hum of the machines. "You need to see this. She's lying about Isla." Look time seemed to freeze. The anesthesiologist paused mid-step. The scrub nurse's hands halted above a tray of instruments, and even Dr. Whitaker stiffened his expression, a mix of disbelief and shock. Morgan's serene composure cracked, the faintest flicker of panic dancing across her eyes as she took a sharp step backward. I lifted my head, heart hammering, and saw the evidence Jasper thrust forward. The recordings played automatically, Morgan's voice calm and deliberate, instructing someone to manipulate Isla's medications to test her reaction to substances not listed in her charts. The photographs showed vials of unfamiliar liquid lab slips, and documents that hinted at experiments far beyond routine care. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold dread swept over me. No, no, I whispered under my breath. Isla. She was part of something dangerous. The realization struck like a physical blow. The woman I had trusted, the one I had let oversee my daughter's care, had been exploiting her body for reasons I hadn't yet fully understood. My hands shook violently, and I clutched the edge of the table to steady myself. Dr. Whitaker's eyes narrowed as he scanned the materials. This is illegal. This isn't just a breach of protocol, it's criminal, he muttered, voice low but firm. The room seemed to vibrate with tension, a quiet chaos settling in as the implications became clear. Morgan opened her mouth, attempting to speak, but the words faltered. The mask of authority she had maintained so perfectly for weeks crumbled under the weight of exposure. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass partition, perhaps in a desperate bid to regain control. I could barely comprehend it. Isla. My Isla. Lying on the bed nearby, oblivious to the danger she had been in. The fear that had gripped me moments before now transformed into a sharp clarity, a single, unrelenting focus. I had to act, and I had to trust Jasper, my small, observant hero who had seen what adults chose to ignore. Stop the procedure, I croaked, voice shaking, but firm. Dr. Whitaker froze, looking at me with a mix of shock and understanding. We need to pause. Immediately. Morgan's eyes widened, panic overtaking her earlier composure. She stepped forward, hand outstretched, as if to assert authority. But Dr. Whitaker blocked her path. Not until we know exactly what's in play here, he said firmly. Everyone stand down. Security is on the way. Jasper handed me the photos and phone, and I held them close, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. My grandson, just 9 years old, had done what we adults had overlooked. His courage had intervened at the critical moment, and in doing so, he had bought Isla the chance to be safe. I took a deep, steadying breath, glancing at Isla's pale face, her small chest rising and falling in the rhythm of life I had fought to protect. It's going to be okay, I whispered, even as my own voice quivered. I promised myself I would make sure she was never exploited again, that the woman who had deceived us would be held accountable, and that the truth would be fully revealed. Morgan's lips trembled as she tried to speak again, but no one moved to listen. The room had shifted the balance of power, tilting entirely in favor of those who sought to protect the innocent. The surgical staff now acted with measured caution, the monitors continuing their relentless beeping, a reminder that life and death hung in perfect alignment, dependent on clarity, vigilance, and courage. Security arrived moments later, swift and silent, escorting Morgan away as her composure completely unraveled. The tension that had coiled in my chest for weeks began to loosen slightly, replaced by the heavy awareness that the worst of the unknown had been interrupted, if only just in time. I knelt slightly, adjusting my grip on Jasper's hand, feeling his small, warm palm in mine. "Thank you," I whispered, voice full of awe and relief. He smiled faintly, eyes wide, but proud. Together we watched as Dr. Whitaker coordinated with the team, ensuring Isla's safety, while managing the aftermath of Morgan's exposure. And as I exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and resolve washing over me, I realized that the battle had shifted. Isla's immediate danger had been averted, but the journey to uncover the full truth and protect her entirely was far from over, leading us inevitably toward the next critical chapter in this tangled web of deception and courage. The chaos in the operating room hadn't subsided. Even with Morgan escorted out and security in place, the air was thick with tension, buzzing like electricity across the polished tiles. Dr. Whitaker moved quickly, his voice firm, as he directed the team to halt preparations to secure Isla's room, to ensure that nothing further would happen until every question was answered. I sat on the edge of the operating table, gripping Jasper's hand tightly, feeling my pulse slowly match the beep of the monitors. My body was trembling, but it wasn't from fear alone. It was from the weight of everything I had just learned. Morgan and Harlan. The evidence Jasper had gathered, combined with my own suspicions, painted a picture too horrific to fully process in a single heartbeat. Isla had been part of an experiment her care manipulated for purposes that were illegal, unethical, and unimaginably cruel. I could still hear Morgan's voice from the recordings, calm and precise, giving instructions that made my stomach churn. Adjust the dosage, she had said. Record the reaction. Make sure no one sees the changes. Every word now rang with the sickening resonance of deceit. Harlan's involvement hinted at, in the documents Jasper uncovered, confirmed what I had feared. This wasn't just a one-off manipulation. It was a coordinated scheme meticulously designed to exploit Isla for purposes no child should ever endure. The OR staff moved with a mixture of caution and disbelief. The anesthesiologist stepped back, hands raised in a gesture of pause. Nurses whispered among themselves, eyes wide as they glanced at the evidence now spread across the prep table. Dr. Whitaker's face was pale, but resolute. We cannot proceed, he said. Until this is fully understood and investigated, there will be no surgery. No exceptions. I exhaled slowly, trying to push down the wave of nausea and disbelief. My body had been primed for sacrifice, ready to give my kidney to Isla without question. But now the stakes had shifted. The person I had trusted implicitly, the woman I had allowed to manage Isla's care, had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way. Every instinct I had developed as a mother, every ounce of vigilance now screamed that the danger had been much closer than I realized. Jasper leaned against me. Small shoulders, tense, his eyes wide but steady. Grandma, he whispered. I knew something was wrong. I didn't think it was this bad. His voice, so young yet filled with determination, anchored me in the present. He had been right. He had always been right. To trust his observations to bring me evidence even when I had hesitated to see the truth. I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and anguish. The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected, slicing through layers of assumed safety, the invisible bond I thought existed between myself and Morgan. Every polite smile, every gentle word over the past weeks now felt like a mask carefully constructed to conceal intentions that would have endangered Isla's life. Dr. Whitaker moved closer, speaking in low, controlled tones. We will review the records, secure the evidence, and alert authorities. The child is safe for now, but we need full transparency before any further action. His calm efficiency was a balm to my frayed nerves, but the tension remained a tight coil in my chest that would not unwind so easily. I closed my eyes, letting the shock wash over me, letting myself feel the betrayal in its full intensity. Morgan's duplicity was not just a personal affront. It was a violation of everything I had believed about trust, about family, about the responsibilities that come with love. My mind replayed every interaction, every subtle manipulation, every moment when I had ignored the uneasy signals that now seemed so glaringly obvious. Yet amidst the whirlwind of anger and disbelief, a sliver of clarity emerged. I had faced hardship before. I had protected my children through sleepless nights, illness, and fear. I could endure this. I could act. The evidence was now undeniable, the risk contained, and the path forward, though painful, was clear. I could protect Isla, hold the betrayers accountable, and ensure that the future she deserved was still within reach. I took a slow, steadying breath and opened my eyes. Jasper looked at me, silent but unwavering, and I knew he was ready to follow my lead. Together, we would navigate the aftermath, confront the betrayal, and rebuild the trust that had been shattered. And as Dr. Whitaker began organizing the staff to secure the evidence and Isla's safety, I realized that the battle had shifted from urgent survival to deliberate justice, and that the truth, though painful, had finally been revealed. I sat beside Isla's bed, holding her hand, feeling the fragile warmth of her skin against my palm. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the monitors, their rhythmic beeping, a reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still mine to protect. The knowledge of what Morgan and Harlan had done gnawed at me, but it also ignited a fierce determination. I would not allow them or anyone to ever endanger my daughter again. Dr. Whitaker approached his expression, composed but purposeful. "We've halted all previous plans," he said, laying a hand gently on my shoulder. "We'll use a controlled treatment that's safe, tailored to Isla's condition. No one else will have access to her medications, and I'll personally oversee everything." Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by lingering anxiety. My hands still shook as I glanced at the unmarked vial now secured in evidence. It was a stark reminder of how close we had come to disaster, of the trust I had once given blindly, and of the vigilance required to ensure it never happened again. "I understand," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor. "I'll stay involved. I won't let her out of my sight, and I'll make sure everything is documented. No one else touches her without my knowledge." The words felt powerful, a declaration I had struggled to find in the hours leading up to this moment. Jasper sat quietly at the foot of the bed, his small hands folded, eyes wide but resolute. "Grandma, I can help," he said softly. "I can check things, make sure they're honest. I want to help Isla." I smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "You've already helped more than you know. We'll watch together, make sure everything is safe. Your eyes are sharper than most adults when it comes to noticing things that aren't right." The sense of agency settled over me gradually, a quiet but insistent fire that replaced the fear and doubt I had felt earlier. For weeks I had been trapped between duty and suspicion, between the desperate need to save Isla and the gnawing awareness that someone close to us had manipulated her care. Now I was no longer passive. I could act. I could protect. I reviewed Isla's charts again, this time with Dr. Whitaker's guidance. Every medication, every scheduled check, every observation was accounted for, double-checked and cross-referenced. I made notes, flagged any potential anomalies, and asked questions that might have seemed redundant, but were essential. This was no longer about blind trust. It was about control, vigilance, and survival. Caleb joined us quietly, offering help where he could. He carried charts, made notes, and asked pointed questions, his concern for his sister mirrored in every careful gesture. I felt a swell of pride and reassurance. Together, we were forming a shield around Isla, a buffer that would prevent anyone from exploiting her again. As the hours passed, I noticed a change in myself. The fear that had dominated me, the panic that had threatened to paralyze my judgment, began to transform into clarity. I could see the steps needed to protect Isla, the procedures to ensure her safety, and the people I could trust implicitly. Each decision, each action reinforced the control I had regained over the situation. I held Isla's hand again, feeling her pulse against mine. The warmth, the steady beat, was a tangible reminder of why I could not falter, why I could not allow complacency. The responsibility was immense, but so was the resolve it inspired. I had faced fear, betrayal, and near disaster, and yet here I was, vigilant, prepared, and ready. Dr. Whitaker adjusted the IV lines, nodding at me. "Everything is under control now," he said. "She's safe and we'll keep it that way. Your involvement makes a huge difference." I exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain slightly from my shoulders. This was only the beginning of protecting her. but it was a decisive step. I could act. I could observe. I could ensure that no one, not Morgan, not Harlan, no one would ever endanger Isla again. And as I leaned closer, smoothing Isla's hair back from her forehead, I knew that the next steps, legal accountability, family decisions, and recovery would be guided by the vigilance and strength I had reclaimed in this moment. The first quiet moments after Isla's surgery were the hardest. I sat in the waiting area, hands clasped tightly, replaying the events of the past hours in my mind. Relief mingled uneasily with fear, and beneath it all simmered a raw, undeniable anger at the betrayal we had uncovered. Morgan and Harlan's deception had brought us to the edge, and though Isla was safe, the emotional scars ran deep. Jasper sat beside me, small but resolute, his chin resting on his chest, as if he carried the weight of the day on his shoulders. "Grandma?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think anyone would listen to me, but you did. We saved her." I drew him close, pressing my cheek against his hair, letting the warmth of his small body calm the storm inside me. "You were incredibly brave, Jasper," I murmured. "Your courage made the difference. You saw the truth when everyone else ignored it. You're a hero, and I am so proud of you." He looked up at me, eyes wide, a faint smile breaking through the tension. I realized that even at 9 years old, he understood the gravity of what had happened, and he had acted with a clarity and courage beyond his years. The staff had secured Isla, monitored her vitals, and begun her recovery. But the weight of deception lingered in the air. I thought of Morgan's calm, calculated smile, of the subtle manipulations that had nearly cost my daughter her life. The anger threatened to consume me, yet I knew I had to channel it to remain clear-headed for Isla's sake. Caleb joined us quietly, carrying Isla's charts. His presence was steadying, a reminder that we were not alone, that our family could face these challenges together. He didn't need words. His silent vigilance spoke volumes, echoing the sense of shared responsibility and the collective commitment to protect our own. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease slightly. Relief was tempered with the bitter knowledge of betrayal. Those we had trusted implicitly had nearly destroyed what mattered most. But there was also hope, a new awareness that strength could be found in vigilance, in action, and in the courage of the youngest among us. As I held Jasper's hand and glanced toward Isla, sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, I felt the sharp clarity of purpose return. The journey ahead would require patience, careful rebuilding, and accountability. But in this moment, the most important truth was undeniable. Isla was alive, and we had acted to protect her. And as the steady beeping of her monitors filled the quiet room, I knew that the next step would be to reclaim our sense of safety and rebuild trust within the family, starting with what had been uncovered today. The phone call from the authorities came early the next morning, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of our home. They had acted swiftly, responding to the evidence Jasper had uncovered and the documentation I had provided. Morgan and Harlan were under investigation, and preliminary reports suggested that their scheme went beyond negligence. It was deliberate, calculated, and criminal. I felt a strange mixture of relief and vindication. Finally, the danger that had loomed over Isla was being confronted with real consequences. I could breathe a little easier, knowing that the people who had betrayed us were being held accountable and that justice would begin to take its course. Isla's treatment resumed under careful, trustworthy supervision. Every dosage, every check, every consultation was double verified. Dr. Whitaker remained vigilant, and I stayed closely involved, monitoring every step. Isla responded quickly, the color returning to her cheeks, the rhythm of her breathing steadying. Each small improvement was a reminder of why vigilance and courage mattered, and why Jasper's bravery had been so essential. Caleb and I reviewed the treatment plans together, making notes, asking questions, and ensuring that every precaution was in place. We were no longer passive observers. We were guardians aware of the past, but focused on the future. Isla needed us fully present, fully alert, and we would not fail her again. I found a quiet moment beside her bed to reflect. The betrayal from Morgan had left its mark, but it had also revealed a truth: protecting those you love sometimes requires facing danger, exposing deception, and challenging the very people you once trusted. It was exhausting, frightening, and emotionally draining, but necessary. Jasper curled up beside me, exhausted but proud. "Grandma," he said softly, "we did it. She's safe now." His small hand squeezed mine, and I realized that courage, even in a child, could shift the balance between harm and protection. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, we did it together. And now we rebuild. Slowly, carefully, but we rebuild." The weight of responsibility was still present, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the immediate danger had passed, that Isla was recovering, and that we had acted decisively. In the following days, Morgan and Harlan faced formal inquiries. Security measures were tightened at the hospital, and every staff member involved in Isla's care was briefed and monitored. The household felt lighter, even as we navigated the lingering unease from what had transpired. I reclaimed a sense of dignity that had been threatened, asserting my role as protector and decision-maker. Trust would need to be rebuilt carefully. Family dynamics adjusted, but I was determined not to allow fear or manipulation to dictate the future. The focus was on Isla, on recovery, and on safeguarding what mattered most. And as I watched her take her first independent steps in recovery, supported by Caleb and Jasper at her side, I knew the next chapter would be about healing, not only physically for Isla, but emotionally for all of us who had survived the storm together. The house felt lighter that evening, the tension that had gripped us for weeks finally easing. Isla was resting comfortably, her recovery steady and secure under safe, attentive care. Caleb helped her with her exercises, his quiet patience a reminder of the stability we had fought to reclaim. Jasper, small but proud, sat nearby, the unspoken hero of our ordeal, his courage recognized and celebrated. I watched them, feeling the weight of fear slowly lift from my chest. The betrayals, the near tragedy, the hidden dangers, they had tested every fiber of my being. Yet here we were together, stronger, wiser, and united. The ordeal had revealed truths that were painful but necessary, and it had shown me the depths of courage, both in myself and in my children. I took Jasper's hand, pressing it gently. "You saved us," I whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me that bravery comes in all sizes, and that love, maternal, familial, can guide us through even the darkest storms." As I gazed at Isla, laughing softly at a shared joke with Caleb, I felt hope settling into my bones. We had survived, learned, and begun to rebuild. Fear had passed, leaving only the strength to protect, nurture, and love. And in that quiet, steady moment, I knew we would face the future together, unshaken and resolute.